There's a moment you don't forget, no matter how much time passes. For me, it was the way my dad looked at me while I was breaking down at my mother's funeral. Not a look of sympathy, not even disappointment. It was disgust, like I had personally embarrassed him by grieving the only person in our family who'd ever truly loved me without conditions. He leaned in, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the lump in my throat, and said, "Real men don't cry, Austin. Pull yourself together and stop embarrassing me." I was 25 years old, but in that moment, I felt like a scared little kid again, shrinking under the weight of a man who never seemed to want a son, just a soldier. And right then, something inside me broke, not in a shattered way, but in a clean snap, like a rope that had been pulled too tight for too long. I stopped crying, and I stopped talking to him entirely. My name's Austin, and I'm 29 now. 4 years have passed since that day, but it still plays on repeat in my head like a bad movie with no ending. It wasn't the first time my dad made me feel like I was too much, too soft, too emotional, but it was the last time I let him have that power. Growing up, my mom was the buffer. She saw me. She understood me. She shielded me from my dad's worst moments. Those cold, military-style lectures about strength, obedience, toughness. I was never into sports, never into cars, never wanted to roughhouse or man up the way he wanted. I liked books. I liked music. I cried at sad movies. I used to write poems when I was a kid. He once found a notebook of mine full of them, and instead of asking about it, he laughed and asked me if I was trying to be the next Shakespeare or something less manly. We lived in a nice enough house in a quiet suburb, the kind where everyone smiles at each other, but no one really knows what's going on behind closed doors. My dad worked in corporate security, big on authority, rules, appearance. My mom stayed at home and made sure our lives ran smoothly. She was warm in all the ways he was cold. She had this soft-spoken way of making you feel safe, even when things were falling apart. I think she spent most of her marriage trying to keep the peace. Between my dad's rigid expectations and my natural tendency to withdraw, she played the middle like a master diplomat. But it took a toll on her. You could see it in her eyes. She never said it outright, but I think she was tired long before the illness took her. She got sick when I was 23. It was sudden and unfair. Pancreatic cancer, already late stage by the time they found it. My dad barely acknowledged it for the first few weeks, like admitting she was dying was somehow weak. I spent most nights at her side, reading to her, talking with her, even when she was too tired to respond. He was always at work or handling things, but never really there. The worst part was that she noticed. She would hold my hand and whisper things like, "Don't ever shut yourself off the way your father did, sweetheart. That's not strength. That's fear in a suit of armor." I still remember the look in her eyes when she said it. Sad, like she was apologizing for something she couldn't change. She passed less than a year later, and everything cracked open. The funeral was quiet. Small. Just a few family members and close friends. I wore the suit she had bought me when I got my first job after college. She said it made me look confident. I was trying to hold it together, I really was. But when they lowered her casket into the ground, it was like my body gave up. My knees buckled and I sobbed. Loud, raw, ugly sobbing. And that's when my father snapped. That's when he told me to stop embarrassing him. Like grief was a performance, and I was doing it wrong. After that, I didn't say another word to him. Not when we got in the car. Not at the reception. Not when he made a comment about how people were looking. I just nodded politely when spoken to and left early. He tried to call me a few days later, but I ignored it. I didn't have the energy to be the son he wanted anymore. And more importantly, I didn't have the mother I used to try to protect by pretending everything was fine. A few weeks later, I got a call from my mom's lawyer. She had left a will. A very specific one. I didn't know the details until I came into the office and sat down across from a man who looked both amused and nervous. "Your mother was thorough," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside was everything. Bank accounts, property documents, investment portfolios. Every single asset she had shared with my father was now under my name. Completely. The house, the savings, the investments, even her private checking account. She had quietly moved things around in the last year of her life, setting it all up to transfer to me automatically upon her death. I was stunned. She never told me, but she must have known what would happen. My dad, for all his lectures on strength and respect, didn't have the slightest clue what she'd done. And when he found out, oh, when he found out, the man who once mocked me for crying was the one throwing a tantrum. He came storming into my apartment the same night, shouting about fraud and betrayal and how I must have manipulated her. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the letter from the lawyer and told him to direct all further communication to my attorney. That's when the war began. He contested the will, claimed undue influence, accused me of forging documents, tried to paint himself as the loving husband who'd been cheated by his own son. He had no idea how much my mom documented. Emails, letters, voicemails. Every move she made was calculated. The woman who had spent her life making sure others were comfortable had finally decided to make me her priority, and every shred of it was legally airtight. Still, the process was long, painful. Every court date felt like I was reliving a nightmare with the man who made my childhood feel like boot camp. And throughout it all, he kept trying to talk to me outside of court, at one point even waiting outside my building just to corner me. "This isn't you, Austin," he said one night, standing in the cold with that same disapproving look. "Your mother would be ashamed." I looked at him and said the only thing I had said to him in months. "You don't get to speak for her." I didn't cave. I didn't yell. I didn't try to explain myself. I just let the lawyers handle it, like he once told me to man up and deal with things like an adult. The irony was poetic. When the verdict came down, it was clean. Every claim he made was rejected. The will stood, and he was out. No house, no retirement fund, no savings. But that's not where this story ends. Because after all that, after everything, he still managed to make himself the victim. He started telling people I had abandoned him, that I was cold, that I had let my grief turn into greed. He started calling me, texting me, leaving voicemails about how hard life was in a studio apartment, how he couldn't believe his own son would leave him to suffer like this. He used the word heartless. The same man who looked at me while I cried at my mother's funeral and said I was embarrassing him. And now here we are. But before I tell you how I responded, and believe me, I did, I need to walk you through everything that happened next. Because what my dad didn't realize was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. After the court ruling, I thought my dad would disappear. That's what most people do when they lose. When they've been legally, morally, and emotionally cornered, they usually retreat into silence, or at least shame. But my dad didn't believe in losing. Not because he was too proud, but because he couldn't imagine being wrong. He didn't just take the defeat personally, he made it my fault. In his mind, I was the villain, the ungrateful son, the betrayer, and instead of retreating, he dug in. It started with the calls. At first, they were spaced out, 1 or 2 voicemails every couple of days. Nothing overtly hostile, just pathetic. "Austin, it's your dad. I need to talk. Just call me back." Or, "I'm struggling here, son. I know things got heated, but we're family. That has to mean something." I deleted them without listening past the first few seconds. Every time I heard his voice, it yanked me back to that funeral, to that moment when I needed a father and got a drill sergeant instead. Then the calls turned bitter. "You're really going to do this to me?" he snapped in one. "Throw me out like garbage? After all I did for this family?" Another one had him practically spitting. "Your mother didn't raise you to be this cruel. She would have been ashamed." That one hit me harder than I expected. Not because I believed it, but because he was using her, the one person I loved without hesitation, to guilt me into obedience, just like he always had. And then came the letters, handwritten, shaky, and stuffed into envelopes with no return address. Some were short, others ran for pages. They were filled with revisionist history, memories rewritten to cast him in a better light. He wrote about all the times he provided, like paying bills and putting food on the table somehow made up for the years of silence, criticism, and emotional neglect. He reminisced about teaching me how to ride a bike, even though that had been my mom. He brought up birthdays he barely showed up for, spinning them into cherished moments we shared. It was like watching someone rewrite a book I had lived in. But the worst part? He started sending the letters to my job. I work in a publishing house, small team, mostly quiet people, everyone keeps to themselves. I'd been careful about keeping my personal life separate. Then, one afternoon, my manager pulled me aside holding a cream-colored envelope. "Austin, I don't want to intrude," she said gently, "but this came for you. It's from someone named Richard. Is that your father?" I finished, throat dry. She nodded slowly and handed it over without pressing. I opened it at my desk and immediately regretted it. This one wasn't sad or nostalgic. It was venomous, accusing me of ruining his life, of stealing what was rightfully his. He blamed me for being alone, for being broke, for being forgotten. He said he was ashamed to call me his son, and that if my mother saw what I'd become, she would disown me herself. I went straight to HR after that and had a formal block put in place. They flagged his name, and from that point on, any mail from him was redirected to a secure holding bin that I could choose to collect or not. I never did. You'd think that would be the end, that once his words stopped reaching me, he'd finally give up. But if I've learned anything about my father, it's that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy, just like mine. One morning, about 5 months after the court case closed, I got a text from my cousin Melissa. We weren't super close, but she was always kind to me growing up. "Hey Austin," she wrote, "sorry to bother you, but your dad showed up at Grandma's house yesterday, said he needed help. Is everything okay?" I froze. Grandma's house. My dad hated going there. He always said his mother was too soft, that she was the reason his brothers turned out weak. And now he was there, playing the victim? I called her that evening. My grandma's voice still had that frail warmth I remembered from childhood. "Austin, sweetheart, your father came by. He looked so tired, so worn down. Did he say why?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. "He said you froze him out, that you manipulated your mother and took everything, that he's living in a one-room apartment now and can barely afford groceries." I exhaled slowly. Did he also mention contesting Mom's will? Calling me heartless? Trying to sue me? "No," she said, and I could hear the disappointment in her tone. Not at me, at him. He left that part out. I explained everything. The court, the letters, the guilt trips, the way he tried to weaponize her memory against me. She listened silently, then sighed. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I believed him. I shouldn't have, but I did. He looked so lost." I understood why she felt that way. My dad was good at performing pain, just never at processing it. It was the one emotion he could show without feeling vulnerable, because to him, suffering was masculine. Grief wasn't. Regret wasn't. Apology definitely wasn't. After that, I started hearing little things from relatives. My uncle texted me asking if things were really as bad as my dad made them sound. A friend of the family reached out on Facebook saying she was praying for my reconciliation. It became clear that he was on a mission, a campaign to rehabilitate his image and smear mine in the process. But then he crossed a line. One night, I got home from work and found a business card slipped under my door. It wasn't from my dad. It was from a private investigator. My stomach dropped. I called the number on the card, heart pounding, and asked what it was about. "Mr. Winters?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is just a courtesy call. I was hired to gather some background information. Nothing invasive. Just lifestyle, income verification, basic intel. Strictly legal. Just wanted to give you a heads up." "Who hired you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Richard Winters." I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. My dad was digging into my life, trying to prove something. Maybe he thought he could find a loophole, some way to take me back to court. Maybe he wanted to intimidate me. Or maybe, most likely, he was trying to gather ammunition to shame me again, to play the martyr even harder. The next day, I called my lawyer. We filed a cease and desist, sent directly to his building, certified mail. We never got a response. But the PI never came back, and no more cards showed up under my door. I took that as a win. For now. But it didn't stop the spiral. A month later, I was at the grocery store when I saw him. He looked thinner, angrier. Eyes sunken, jaw tight. He was pushing a half-empty cart of cheap canned goods and frozen dinners. I turned to leave the aisle, but he spotted me. "Austin," he said, loud enough for heads to turn. I froze. He stepped closer. "You just gonna pretend I don't exist?" I kept my voice low. "You need to walk away." I needed help, he hissed. But all you did was lawyer up and slam the door. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who used to tower over me like a storm cloud. Who once called me soft for crying, weak for feeling, pathetic for asking for affection. Now he stood there, hunched and hollow, and still, blaming me. "You remember Mom's funeral?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "I was crying. Because I loved her. Because I lost her. And you called me embarrassing. That was the last thing you ever said to me before you started fighting for her money." His jaw worked. "You were." "Don't," I snapped. Don't you dare say I was too emotional or dramatic or whatever other garbage you used to control me with. You made your choice that day, and now, I've made mine. People were staring now, but I didn't care. For once, I didn't feel small in front of him. I felt done. He opened his mouth again, but I walked away. And that should have been the final breaking point. The moment we both moved on. But it wasn't. I didn't think one encounter at a grocery store could shake me like that. But it did. Something about seeing my father like that, hollow, resentful, still clinging to the same broken narrative, reopened an old wound I didn't realize was still bleeding. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed for what felt like hours, staring at the floor with my coat still on. The silence in my apartment was heavy. Not peaceful, just heavy. Like the air itself was pressing down on me. I kept thinking about what he said. You just gonna pretend I don't exist? And the thing is, I wanted to pretend. I wanted to erase every memory, every reprimand, every moment of quiet disapproval that shaped me into someone who flinched at compliments and second-guessed every good thing that came into his life. But I couldn't. Pretending he didn't exist meant pretending I didn't come from him. And no matter how much I hated it, I did. That realization broke me. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of way where you start moving through your days like a ghost. I stopped returning texts, skipped lunch with my coworkers, let dishes pile up in the sink until I was drinking out of mason jars and eating with plastic forks. I missed a meeting at work, just forgot it entirely, and my manager, Sarah, pulled me aside after. She was kind about it, but direct. Austin, whatever's going on, you don't have to carry it alone. But you do need to talk to someone. I nodded, promised I'd think about it. That night, I opened a new browser tab and typed grief counseling near me before closing it again. And again, and again. It took 2 more weeks before I actually clicked a link. I ended up finding a therapist named Jordan who specialized in complicated grief and family trauma. His website had a quote on the homepage that said, "Sometimes the most painful stories are the ones we tell ourselves." That stuck with me. So I booked a session. Walking into that office the first time felt like walking into a courtroom where I was both the defendant and the witness. I didn't know where to start. I talked about my mom, then my dad, then my silence, then my rage. I talked about that moment at the funeral, the grocery store, the letters, the court, the weight of it all. Jordan didn't interrupt, didn't nod too much. He just listened. At the end of the session, he said, "You've been grieving 2 losses at once. Your mother's death and the father you never really had." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was true. And that acknowledgement, that permission to grieve something that technically wasn't gone, opened a door I didn't realize had been locked. Over the next few months, I kept going. Weekly at first, then bi-weekly. We talked about boundaries, identity, self-worth. We dug into memories I hadn't revisited in years. The birthday I spent alone in my room after my dad said I was too old for all that fuss. The college graduation he missed because he had a security conference. The night I got my first job offer, and he told me I should have aimed higher. These weren't violent moments. They were quiet erasures. And those leave the deepest bruises. Therapy wasn't a magic wand. It didn't fix everything. But it helped me start untangling the wires. Helped me stop seeing my worth as something I needed to earn from people who couldn't give it freely. Around that time, things at work started shifting too. Sarah pulled me into her office one morning with an unreadable expression. "So," she said, "we've been watching your submissions, your edits, your pitches, and we're impressed. The kind of impressed that comes with opportunity." I blinked. "Opportunity?" She smiled. "We're launching a new imprint, focused on memoirs and personal storytelling. Stuff that hits emotional cores. You've got a knack for it, Austin. We want you to lead the editorial team." I just stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Think about it. Let me know by the end of the week." I said yes the next day, and something about that, being trusted, chosen, seen, felt like a turning point. I started dressing a little sharper, not for anyone else, but because it made me stand taller. I reconnected with old friends, went on a couple of dates. One of them didn't go anywhere, but the other, her name was Celine, turned into something steady. We met at a local author reading, both reached for the same paperback at the merch table. She was funny, sharp, asked good questions. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours over bad coffee and ended with a shared playlist we still add to every week. Celine didn't ask about my family right away, but when she did, I told her everything. Not all at once, but piece by piece. She didn't flinch, didn't offer pity, just sat with it. It's okay to leave someone behind, she said once. Even if they're holding your last name. I didn't know how badly I needed to hear that. As the months passed, I felt lighter. Not fixed, but less fractured. I volunteered to lead a writing workshop at the local community center, just a couple of evenings a month, helping people turn their stories into essays or poems. One night, a teenage boy brought in a piece about losing his older brother to addiction. After he read it, he looked at me and said, "I thought I'd feel worse sharing it out loud. But I feel better." I nodded. That's how you know it's real. I walked home that night with a strange ache in my chest. The good kind. The kind that says maybe I've survived something. And then, just when I thought I'd finally found my footing, something changed. It started with a knock on my door. It was a Sunday morning. I was making pancakes, half dancing to the music playing off my phone. Celine was still in bed, wrapped up in my hoodie. The knock was soft, hesitant. I opened the door and found a woman in a blazer holding a thick envelope. "Mr. Winters?" I nodded slowly. "I'm with the legal office representing the late Margaret L. Winters. We've been trying to reach you by phone. Your number must have changed." My heart skipped. "Grandma." The woman handed me the envelope and offered a polite nod. "She passed away peacefully 2 weeks ago. Her will names you as the primary heir." I just stared at her. I didn't even know she was sick. She wasn't. It was her heart. Sudden. I thanked her, closed the door, sat down. My hands were shaking. Celine emerged from the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "Everything okay?" "My grandma died," I whispered. "And she left me something." Inside the envelope was a letter, in her familiar handwriting. It was short. "Austin, my boy, I'm sorry for believing him. I see things more clearly now. This is my way of making sure you know that I did love you. Not just as my grandson, but as the best of what this family could have been." Attached was the revised will. Everything. The house, her savings, the personal heirlooms, the land she still owned out in the countryside. All of it, left to me. My heart broke in two, and then it hardened, because I knew exactly who was not going to take this news well. And I was right. 3 days later, I got the first voicemail in nearly a year. "You selfish, conniving brat. I just found out what your grandmother did. Are you proud of yourself? First your mother, now my own mother. You took them both from me, and now you've got your claws in everything. Do you even hear yourself? How heartless are you?" The second voicemail came an hour later. "I need that house, Austin. You know I do. You already took everything else. Don't make this worse than it has to be." And just like that, the calm I had built, my quiet little life with its healing rituals and new beginnings, started to ripple. But this time, I wasn't the same Austin he remembered. I wasn't 25 and broken. I wasn't soft in the way he used to twist like a knife. I had learned how to grieve, how to speak, how to draw lines and build something behind them. I had learned how to be a man on my own terms. And I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story again. The thing about grief is that it teaches you patience. When you lose someone you love, not just to death, but to betrayal, to neglect, to erosion over years, you learn how to sit with silence, how to hold your breath and wait. That's what I did when the voicemail started again. I didn't respond. I didn't block him. I just listened. Each message gave me more information than he realized. His desperation, his delusion, and most importantly, his lack of control. And that was something new. My father had always controlled the story. He narrated my life in his voice for so long that I forgot I had one of my own. But now I had the pen. The morning after I got the second voicemail, the one where he demanded my grandmother's house, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began making calls. The will had already been filed with the county. My name was on the deed. The house, the land, the assets, legally, all mine. But I wasn't interested in just keeping what he wanted. That wasn't enough anymore. I didn't want him to lose by accident. I wanted him to feel it. Step 1 was gathering information. I called Jordan, my therapist, asked if he could recommend someone who handled estate law from a strategic standpoint, not just defensive. He gave me the name of a woman named Evelyn Marks. "She doesn't suffer fools," he said. "If you want to play chess, she's already thinking 5 moves ahead." That was exactly what I needed. I met Evelyn the next day in a small office that smelled like leather and lavender. She wore tailored suits and red-framed glasses, and the moment I explained the situation, she gave a small, approving nod. "So," she said, folding her hands. You don't want to just win. You want to finish him. I hesitated. That sounds cruel. No, she said. That sounds like clarity. We began with a full review of the assets my grandmother had left. The house was old but well maintained, valued at just under $800,000 thanks to its location. The land, zoned for potential development. The savings were modest, but her investments had matured significantly. All in, it was over $1 million in liquid and real estate value. And my father knew it. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp. You could just sit on it. Or sell. But if you're looking for a longer play, I have an idea. I leaned forward. What if we don't just deny him access, she said. What if we turn the property into something better, something public, something meaningful, something with your name on it? I blinked. Like a business? Or a foundation? Or a retreat center? Or even a writer's residency, given your background? Something that makes it impossible for him to ever reclaim space in that house. Something that honors the woman who left it to you, and everything he ignored. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept turning over the idea. A writer's residency. A place where people could come, free of charge, to heal and write and grow. A place for the quiet kids. The bookworms. The misfits who were told they were too emotional. My mother would have loved it. My grandmother? Even more. I talked it over with Celine. We were sitting on the couch, half watching a documentary while she traced patterns on the back of my hand with her fingertips. Wouldn't that be rubbing it in? I asked. She looked at me. Austin, he wants that house so he can rewrite his narrative. So he can say the world didn't beat him. That you didn't beat him. So yeah, maybe it is rubbing it in. But it's also rewriting the truth in your own ink. I smiled. You always say the right thing. I just say the true thing. The next week, I filed the paperwork for a nonprofit. The Winters Foundation for Storytelling and Healing. A bit long, but I liked the way it sounded. I hired a designer to draw up a logo. Bought a domain. Registered social media handles. I reached out to a few local writers I knew. Asked if they'd be interested in teaching workshops once the house was ready. The outpouring was immediate. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who needed a place like this. Meanwhile, Evelyn kept digging. She found out my father had been evicted from his apartment 2 months earlier. The place he was living in now, rented under the table from a friend, no lease, no stability. His credit score had tanked after the legal fees from contesting my mom's will. He had no retirement plan, no car. He was using prepaid phones to avoid collections. The image he was projecting, of the wronged patriarch barely getting by, was accurate. But what made it unbearable to him was the audience. See, his pride only worked when there was someone to impress. And now, the family was shrinking around him. My grandma was gone. His sister, my Aunt Liz, had cut ties after he tried to borrow money last Christmas. Even Melissa, my cousin, told me he stopped answering her calls when she refused to co-sign a loan. He was running out of options. Which is why, when he showed up at the open house we hosted for the foundation, I wasn't surprised. I had invited friends, writers, supporters, even Sarah, my manager. The house was cleaned, the porch repainted, the interior lightly restored. Nothing flashy, just warm, welcoming. We had candles burning and soft music playing in the background. Celine stood by the old piano near the window, smiling as I gave a short speech about what the foundation meant to me. That's when I saw him, standing by the gate, wearing a faded coat and a face full of bitterness. I didn't acknowledge him, just continued talking. But he made his way in anyway. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough to interrupt. "What is this?" People turned. I stepped down from the porch and met him on the walkway. "This," I said, "is my grandmother's house. My house now." He scoffed. "You're really doing this? Turning our family home into some kind of, what? Art camp?" I smiled politely. "Healing center, actually. For people who grew up like I did." His eyes narrowed. "You think this is noble? This is pathetic. Parading your wounds around like trophies." "No," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's called ownership. Of my past. My story. My voice." "You always were soft," he muttered. "Your mother spoiled you. Your grandma babied you. And now you're wasting their legacy." "Funny," I said. "They both seemed to think I was the legacy." That stopped him. He glanced around, at the guests, at the smiling faces, at the framed photo of my mother I had placed in the front hallway. "You're humiliating me," he said under his breath. "No," I said, stepping closer. "You did that. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough. Every time you chose pride over connection. Every time you called me weak when all I wanted was to be seen. He clenched his fists. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said softly. But it makes me free. And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't have to kick him out. He left on his own, realizing there was nothing left to take. But that wasn't the end. Because a few days later, I got an email from a local paper. Hi Austin, it read. We're doing a piece on unique community spaces and nonprofits. We heard about your story. Would you be open to an interview? I hesitated. Then I clicked reply. And that is when the final domino fell. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, destroys a narcissist like having the truth published, where everyone can see it. The article came out 2 weeks later. It was a modest piece, tucked in the local section of the Sunday paper, but the headline carried weight. Turning grief into growth. How one man transformed his family's home into a healing center for writers. The journalist had done her homework. She interviewed me at the house, took photos of the garden I'd restored with my mother's favorite lavender, captured Celine and me painting the porch steps together, and even included quotes from some of the early workshop attendees. But it wasn't just a feel-good human interest piece. It was personal, honest. I talked about the loss of my mother, my grandmother, and the complicated legacy I inherited, not just in property, but in pain. I didn't mention my father by name, but I didn't need to. Anyone who knew our family knew exactly who I was referring to when I said, some people define strength by silence. I used to believe that, too. But real strength is learning how to speak when you've spent your whole life being told not to. I hadn't expected much fallout. A few texts, maybe another angry voicemail. But what happened instead was poetic. It started with a phone call from Evelyn. Austin, she said, sounding oddly amused. You might want to sit down. She forwarded me an email thread between my father and a local real estate developer named Barry Kellerman. The same Barry who had previously made offers on my grandmother's land for a proposed strip mall that she'd always rejected. My dad had apparently reached out to him again, hoping to secure a backdoor deal, something under my nose. He offered to broker a conversation, saying he had leverage, that I was emotionally unstable, and would eventually cave if pushed hard enough. Barry, sensing something shady, forwarded the emails to his legal team. One of his assistants happened to be married to one of the writers in my workshop. Small world. I sent the entire thread to Evelyn. She laughed. He's not just desperate. He's sloppy. We could bury him with a restraining order. I paused. Can we do more than that? She leaned forward. How far are you willing to go? And that's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to let him rewrite the ending. Not this time. Step 1 was the restraining order, easily granted after the emails and past harassment. Step 2 was putting a public legal notice in the paper, affirming that all communications regarding the Winters property would go through my office and that I had zero intention of selling, leasing, or transferring any part of the estate. It was formal, clear, and permanent. Then came step 3, the gala. With Evelyn's help and some generous donations from local businesses and former students, I planned an inaugural gala for the foundation, a celebration of storytelling, healing, and community. We invited authors, counselors, educators, and artists. I wore my best suit. Celine looked radiant in a navy blue dress. The house had never looked better. Lights strung through the trees, live music on the porch, and tables adorned with fresh hydrangeas. Halfway through the evening, I gave a speech. Not about my father, but about legacy. I used to think legacy was something you inherited, I told the crowd. But now I understand. It's something you build. It's in the lives you touch, the stories you help shape, the spaces you leave better than you found them. The applause felt like closure. But the final note came weeks later, quiet and surgical. Evelyn had discovered that my father had taken out a high-interest loan years earlier, using what he believed was shared marital property as collateral. Problem was, after the court case, it was proven that my mother had quietly moved those assets into her name, meaning he had no legal authority to use them. The debt collectors had been circling for years. Now they had an opening. Evelyn contacted them with all the documentation. They moved in fast. Within a month, my father's last remaining assets, what little he had managed to scrape together, were seized to cover the outstanding debt. His bank accounts were frozen. His name was blacklisted from multiple lenders. And the friend who had been renting him a room? Kicked him out after learning my dad had used his name to try and open a new credit line. That was the final straw. The next I heard, he was living in a budget motel outside of town. No phone, no car, no friends, just bitterness and bedbugs. I never went to see him. I didn't need to, because the revenge wasn't just in what he lost. It was in what I built. The foundation became something real, something beautiful. We held workshops every season, partnered with schools, published anthologies of the writing that came out of the retreats. I watched people walk through the same halls my father once stormed through and leave with lighter shoulders. I saw kids who reminded me of myself, quiet, uncertain, find their voices for the first time. And sometimes, when I'd walk past the old oak tree in the backyard, I'd pause. Not to mourn, but to reflect, to remember the boy I used to be, the one who cried at his mother's funeral and was told to be ashamed. I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm proud. Proud of the pain that taught me how to grow. Proud of the silence I broke. Proud of the legacy I chose to build with love, not fear. The last time I heard from my father, it was a letter, sloppily handwritten. No return address. All it said was, "You turned everyone against me. You made me nothing." I folded it once and dropped it into the shredder. Because I didn't make him nothing. He did that all on his own. I made myself into something. And that's the difference. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they told you you could never be.